morning. Welcome to Grace House Akron. Today we'll be discussing cultural considerations at the end of life for our caregiver certification training module 6. So as we get started, we'll first discuss culture. What is culture? The values, beliefs, and practices of a particular group that are either learned and or shared, and it also guides a person's thinking, decisions, and actions in a patterned way. So each group of people have these types of things that makes the culture. Characteristics of a culture is universal, shared by a group, it's ever-changing, and it defines their group. It's associated either with the ethnic, religious, or age group, and none of these characteristics makes any one group better than another. It's not better, it just makes them different, which is really important to keep in mind. Concepts that are related to culture, because we hear different terms thrown around all the time, like what is your ethnicity, what is your culture, where are you from? And sometimes I think some terms are interchangeable, but some things are different, like race versus ethnicity versus culture. So ethnicity means that you belong to a group of people who share a common cultural background. Acculturation is assimilation to a different culture. So that's if someone comes from another country and like I have friends from Zimbabwe, Africa, and for her to come, even though she's African, to come and live in America where there's African Americans, our cultures are completely different. So the next one is race, group of people who share physical characteristics such as skin color. So that would determine their race, not ethnicity. Diversity is a range of human differences, various differences, race, ethnicity, gender, age. So it encompasses all of those things. Social class, religious beliefs, that would be diversity. Stereotype would be a generalized belief about a particular category of people. So there are some groups of people that have thoughts and beliefs about other groups that may not be true, but they place those beliefs on them, and it's just something that's stereotypical. Prejudice is a favoring or dislike of something or someone without good reason. So you not liking someone because of the color of their skin or because they may choose to live a certain way. So multicultural society, these are just percentages of what the projections, and this wasn't as of 2010, based on the information that we kind of developed this slideshow for or with. So you can kind of review that to see where those percentages are. What do we learn from culture? It's very important to consider all of this, because as we're caring for people, we don't want to offend anyone. We want to take into considerations that even though they may come from different backgrounds, that that we still honor that, and that we still respect that, and not look at it differently just because it's not the same as ours. What do we, so how it influences beliefs about health or illness, how to better interact and communicate with others. It provides how to culturally be sensitive to the care that we provide, and then not everyone in a cultural group is the same, which is so true, so true. I can vow for that. Cultural competence. So that's why we're here now, to kind of go through that. A person's ability to understand or interact with and effectively communicate with patients, their families, and caregivers from cultures different from your own. It helps you to have cultural sensitivity, which is a set of skills that allows people to learn about and understand people who are different from themselves, and be open to that. Don't just block it because that person doesn't look like you or does not speak like you. Allowing them to respond with respect to those different from them that shows and affirms their worth and value. So how do we give culturally competent care? Be aware of how your own culture influences your attitudes, beliefs, and communication styles. Convey knowledge and understanding about the patient's culture and how it affects their illness. And accept and respect cultural differences. So I'll stop here and just ask, do you have any thoughts or any experiences that maybe speak to some of the things that we've already discussed? I know I have some, but I just want to see if there's anything that you can think of as an example of how you may have had some of these thoughts or beliefs or attitudes, and experienced it with any direct patient interaction or either family interactions, that you maybe had to take a step back and say, okay, even though this person is not of the same culture as I am, same race, but I need to consider that this may be something that's, unique to them. Sure, Hannah.
Sure. So, if I'm able, when I spent time working at a crisis inpatient unit, a lot of the time, similarly to here, you might be speaking with an individual and they'd like to share things from their past with you. And especially if it's a population like Grace House serves that has, folks with maybe a good deal of trauma, some of the things they're sharing might be very outside of your experiences or what you feel would be typical to come across in your cultural upbringing. So in those moments, I found that it was especially important to check internally where I was at to ensure that I wasn't coming across as judgmental just because
Right.
those were novel experiences to me.
Very good. Glad you brought that up because I think that's real important. It's not always, that you're African, that you're Asian or Latina. Like, it's not always those things that set people apart, but the things from your background, like how you were brought up, the socioeconomic status that you grew up in and maybe are still in, that we have to kind of do that and look at ourselves and say, take a step back, like you said, and really check internally so that we're not judging them. So thank you. Good points. So, along with the cultural competent care, just keep in mind not to assume your patient's beliefs and values are the same as yours. Be open to cultural encounters. Adapt care to match the patient's culture. It may be that the way that you're used to providing care may have to be adjusted or tweaked because we want to be able to be sensitive to what their needs are and how they may feel most appreciated, and that you're seeing that they have separate beliefs and values. Learn by asking questions. It's okay to ask questions. I think that's a great thing because we don't know everything. And so just to get more information or insight from the person, who better to get that from. So avoid making assumptions and judging others. Appreciate differences. God made all of us different. I was just telling my daughter this morning. I said it's almost like, I'm not a baker, but when I think of all the ingredients that you have to put in a cake to make it come out and you bake it at a certain time, I feel like that's how God, He puts everything in each person that we need. And it might be different. There's different flavors of cakes, but when we come out, when we're born, we have exactly everything that we need to make it through this life. So I just really believe that we have to be okay with people being different and appreciate that even though I might not do it that way, that's how they do it and be okay with it. Enter the patient's world and try to see the illness through the patient's eyes, which goes back to the empathy, that skill of empathy. So there's a couple acronyms here. The first one is LEARN, LEARN. The L is for listen to the patient. This will kind of guide you as you are caring for people and having that cultural sensitivity. Listen to the patient, which would be thoughts that he or she has about the state of his or her health. E is for explain. Explain what you hear the patient saying. Repeat back to them what you heard them say, which lets them know that you're engaged and that you're a part of the conversation and you care about what they're sharing. Acknowledge, A is for acknowledge the differences between you and the patient, and that's something that may be done more internally, like you said earlier. Recognize that differences do exist, and negotiate is in with the patient to make a plan for the care provided. So, for example, the need for the patient to have spiritual care or a counselor to visit to assist them with any emotional needs that they may be having. The second is this is not really, I guess it is an acronym, but it's a cultural assessment, and I won't read all of this, but just so that you get the gist, I'll just kind of touch each of it briefly. Confer. So the C is for communication. These are questions that you can ask of yourself to help you through providing that cultural care. Does the patient speak English? And what nonverbal communication is being used. Orientation would be what is the patient's ethnic identity, values, orientation, and acculturation. N is for nutrition, their food preferences, because it may vary from culture to culture. Even though we may not eat certain things, certain foods may be important, like I always go back to African American, but when, like, I know people in my family, they want pork. They want any type of pork, ribs, all sorts of areas of the pig, but ribs and bacon and anything from the pig is good. So that's really important. Food preferences, family relationships. How is the family defined? Really keeping in mind like who is the head of the family or household. There's some cultures where there's multi-generations that live in the same household, and you have to direct all of the questions or information to the head of the house or the patriarch. Like it can't be directed to the matriarch, so. Health and health habits is for H. What does the patient do to stay healthy? Like, what are those beliefs and values surrounding their health? Education, what is the patient's education level? Because it may be that they don't have a high health literacy. So, considering that, you may have to educate on a lower level just so that they can understand the things that they have to do to help keep them healthy. And religion, how do the patient's religious or spiritual beliefs or preferences affect his or her life? That's a big piece because there are some that the religion is like embedded in their culture. So really keeping all of those things in mind. Culturally affected end of life aspects. A lot of times end of life decisions are based and rooted in a person's culture. So what they believe and their values surrounding anything with death and dying, like it changes things. Like you think that just makes sense. Why don't they understand, or why don't they want it? But if the culture and what their beliefs are and their values about life in general, even religious beliefs, if that drives that, then those end of life decisions, even though it may seem logical to us because from a health perspective, we would see them at there's not really any, I won't say chance, but the treatments are not effective anymore, and hospice would be the best thing. It just may not, they may not be there because of their strong cultural beliefs.
couple of things. Well, our Jewish community has very strong opinions depending on whether it's Orthodox or Reformed or about end of life, and really the rabbi needs to be has some communication and involvement in that, in making those decisions. And a number of times when I've been called upon to take care of people at the end of life, there was one or two rabbis in the room asking really detailed questions that you would think you'd only be giving to the family, but because they are the elder. I think more currently, with 9,000 Nepalese refugees in Akron,
Yes.
we were surprised to find, for instance, that at times there are hidden reasons why they're resisting your treatment, and it's not because they're non-compliant. It's because they're being compliant with something far more powerful.
That's right.
Which is their family of origin and their understanding. So, for instance, we found that they would readily take pills for diabetes, but when we would offer insulin, because it really was necessary, they would nod and they would accept, and they would not use it. So we couldn't understand it. So we brought those families into our clinic and said, what are we doing wrong? What are we missing? And they were so respectful, and they informed us that unless you engage the elder in their community, there's usually a spiritual elder or leader over several families. They're growing gardens. And secondly, they believe in a balance in their system. And putting it, a pill is okay, it's like an herb, but taking an injection, that's going to upset their balance and almost, not quite against their religion, but kind of. So we would invite them, we added a line to the resident doctors, make sure you ask about a decision about the elder. Do they need to come or be involved? Can we call them? Will they come in with a translator? And that allowed us to move ahead with really life-needed care. Here we don't give insulin, but I think it's so important for us to be curious about people, because we weren't raised like them. Even if they're people raised in the same county as Grace House, their beliefs and their understanding how their family works is going to be completely different than our own.
Very different.
So respecting that, and I liked what you said, is so important. We remove all judgmentalism from our bodies when we treat these people. We just think of when you're going in the room, it's like the door takes it out of you. And instead now you're in there and you're going to be curious, you're going to listen, you're going to ask, and you're going to let them be who they are and kind of go from there together, rather than trying to, okay, well, this isn't right, let me fix you.
Right.
It's much more about, really, okay, so how would you make a decision like that, and let them tell you. And we all know that's going to be a better outcome.
Yeah.
So those are some thoughts.
No, that's great. Thank you for sharing. I like the information about the patients from Nepal, because that is a culture that I'm ever learning about. I've been in a lot of different doctors' offices that I worked in, and through SUMA, and we had a wide range. And then even where we're located here at Grace House, like we're right in the midst of their culture, like, because there's so many of them in this area that live now. So yeah, I think that's a really good point, that we can't just always assume that they're not wanting to take care of their health or be healthy, or don't see that as an important part of their life, but they go about it differently than some people do. So that's okay.
I was just going to say that I recall when I worked at SUMA, we had a resident physician, and he was from Puerto Rico. And he was an intern, and one of the things that he said really early on in his training was that he was just like, I just don't understand. I don't understand why here in the United States people die in hospitals. He goes, that's not how our culture is. We die at home. And that is how it is done. That is just the norm. And it was so fascinating to me to learn that and to understand that, and for him to express that, because he was being trained as a physician here in the United States, but coming from a different country and a different culture, seeing something just, smack in his face that's entirely different than what he's accustomed to, and, how he had to really internally kind of understand that, but still value his cultural values.
Agreed. That's a good point, Pat. Thank you. That's a good point because I remember that brings back to memory when I was working on 3 East at SUMA, the palliative care unit, and we had a patient that practiced Islam. Yep, and I think we had to turn when the patient passed away. We had to turn the bed itself to a certain direction.
Mecca, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Out of respect, because and it had to be done like right at the time, like that the person took his last breath. So that was interesting for all of us to learn that because we had not had that experience up to that point. But all of that, like taking all of those things into consideration, their rituals, the rituals that go along with end of life as well as when the person actually dies. So there we go, death and mourning rituals. With that said, American end of life values. In America, person has a right to make decisions about health care. Person should be told the truth about their illness. That person should have control over their life and death. And the person should express their wishes about the care that they want. Cultural end of life symptom management. So this is something that is ever changing, or where you have to just continue to learn. You have to determine what are the views the patient holds related to pain and use of pain medication when it's surrounding care at end of life, because even though we say, oh, we've got this ordered, this is strong medication that'll help you, some cultures just don't want or believe that that is something, like to Dr. Jones's point earlier with the insulin, they don't want certain things or to take certain things. We just had a gentleman that was here and just passed away. He would not take the hydromorphone that was scheduled for or ordered for him. He only wanted Tylenol. And we kept telling him, but if you're having that much pain, oh, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. But he did not want that hydromorphone. And I think it was more surrounded to his religious beliefs, but eventually he did start to take it as he declined. But yeah. So nutrition, that's another thing that we kind of touched on. Food and drinks that are unique to a patient's culture that may be enjoyable to them. When I think about the Italian culture, like they drink wine with every meal. That's just a part of their culture. So we shouldn't think or be judgmental that, oh, why are they drinking alcohol? That's like us drinking Kool-Aid. They enjoy their wine. So and they should be able to have those foods and drinks that are enjoyable to them even at the end of life. Death rituals help to acknowledge a change in status, serve as a way to deal with the feelings of powerlessness, and maintain a connection to the person who passed away. So that's all included in the death rituals. And it also helps mourners, those family members or friends, to make the transition to the person's death and their new identity without that person being here, that could be influenced mostly by their cultural value, belief systems, and religion.
And this is rare, but we had one patient who was in a critical situation, was unconscious, and it was a Southeastern tradition that the person would depart for heaven with a full stomach. So we went back and forth because the decisions were made by the eldest son, and the family said, we can't respect and bless our dad unless he goes with a full stomach. Well, the American thing would be, no, we're not giving, it wasn't for nutrition. It was a ritual.
Right. It was a ritual.
So we figured out a way. We asked, our infusion team and everything, and they were able to use a temporary feeding. And the whole point of this was they would have a full stomach, and the family was completely satisfied that
Okay.
he was treated well That was the whole thing they had to get done. I had never heard that. But again, I love that his care team moved to try to satisfy that, even though it runs counter to,
Exactly.
you're going to aspirate, it's going to be bad.
Yes.
But
Yes.
this was an important thing we'd never encountered before.
And you said which culture?
It was a Southeastern Asian, I think it was a Tibetan tradition,
I see.
and
Okay.
not universal, but very important to his family. And so that's
Yeah.
what we did. And
That's
they
great.
felt he was blessed and ready for, the next life. So
I think that's great. And I think that's a great point, is knowing what's important to that group of people that you may be taking care of. What's important to them, because it is different for each person, each group of people. So I like that. Thank you. In summary, the U.S. is a diverse country representing many different cultural groups. Healthcare workers need knowledge of culture in order to provide culturally appropriate care, especially at the end of life. Cultural competence includes looking at one's own biases, which is what, Hannah, you were speaking of earlier. Ask patients about their values and practices, because those values, that's what's important to them, and how those values are manifested in their lives. Do not force your beliefs on others is something to really keep in mind. We can have our beliefs, but we can't force it on anyone. Should just be back in the back of our mind when we're taking care of those individuals. Any additional thoughts, questions that you might want to add? Sure, Hannah.
Just one quick final thought after Dr. Jones's sentiment. I think that it can be difficult, especially when residents or patients with cultural considerations that might not typically be found in a setting that is medical or Western are requesting those things. And sometimes it might be that there needs to be alternative methods of satisfying those. So I think that's a good creativity to keep in mind.
Agreed. Agreed. Well, thank you. That concludes our discussion about cultural considerations at the end of life.